Good afternoon and welcome to this segment of Frankly Franklin. I'm Mary Lou Matthews and my guest today is Bill Eldred, a World War II veteran. And we're coming up here on Veterans Day, and I think we want to celebrate some of the, I don't know if exploits is the right word, but some of the achievements that Bill and his fellow veterans did in World War II. So I'm glad to have you with me today. You brought some things to look at, so why don't we just start there. Now let's see, when did you go into the war?
I went in right after Pearl Harbor in March of '42.
Did you enlist then?
Yeah, I had already had a private pilot's license and was designed to go into the Air Corps. I had that in mind all the time, even before we got into the war. So as soon as we got in, I signed up and I got accepted by the Air Force and went through all the training.
And so you ended up flying a B-24.
Yeah, I flew B-17s and B-25s and on the way up, and finally when it's time to get a crew, they were making B-24s faster than the others, so I was assigned a B-24, got my crew, and went through the whole war with the B-24.
Why don't we talk a little bit about the B-24 and how it was set up? And this was a plane that flew bombing runs.
Yes, solely bombing.
Solely bombing. And I think you were telling me earlier, we might use the plane here. Why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the positions on the plane and where you would have been on this plane when you were flying it?
Sure. This is a 10-man crew, and the pilot, crew commander, that was me, sat in the left seat here with the controls. His co-pilot sat on the right. The nose turret gunner had 2 guns in a turret. The belly turret gunner, down here, you probably heard legends about the belly turret gunner, what a terrible place that was to be. He had 2 guns in his belly turret. The top turret gunner had 2 guns in his turret. The tail gunner had 2 guns in his, and each of 2 waist gunners had a single gun sticking out the window here. So that was 10 guns that were there to protect. So you can see the idea was that if you flew in a big group like 30 ships, you had 300 guns protecting you. They couldn't all shoot in the same direction, obviously, but it was to dissuade the German fighters from attacking. It didn't, because we had one job: to get the bomb on the target, no matter what. You never, ever varied from the target. If the plane would fly and hold formation, you went to the target. You were trained that way, brainwashed as it were. The German fighters were the same way. I can imagine they hated to come into this firepower that we had, but they had to, because they just had a single mission, was to knock us down so we couldn't get to the target.
How successful were these planes against the Germans?
Well, we probably overstated the number of German fighters that we shot down.
Well, that's like fishing tails, isn't it?
Pretty much, yeah. And you can understand, you got 30 airplanes up here and 50 German fighter planes coming in from all directions, and some of them blowing up, some of them burning, some of them going down. And then at the debriefing, when the mission was over, everybody would say what they saw and what they thought they did. Well, it's inevitable that some of the German fighters that went down were hit by machine guns from different planes, from different things. So some guys, maybe 2 or 3 guys, would claim the same fighter that went down, and the official registry would say we shot down 3 fighters and maybe all 3 were the same one. But that's an extreme. In the main, they would shoot down pretty close to 1-to-1 probably of us to them. But what their favorite tactic was to let their flak, and this is a flak gun, the anti-aircraft gun that would come up.
And we have a little piece of flak here that, I'm curious, how did you get this?
Well, this came from a burst that came in behind my back and lodged in the bulkhead brace here. And I have another piece I didn't bring, it's too little, that the mechanic gave me when I got back. There was a piece of flak came into the number 2 engine here, right through the propeller twisting, and it knocked the front end of the engine out, put a hole in the oil sump, and all the oil spewed out, and I had to shut this one down. It's called feathering. You have control, if you get to it in time, where the propeller blades turn around and they're knife edge into the wind, so that when the engine is no longer giving you any power pull, it's also not setting up a lot of drag to have the other 3 engines pulling a winding propeller. So as soon as the oil leaked out, my oil gauge showed that it shut that down, and you got 30 seconds, it burns up. I got it shut down in time. When I got back, I saw the hole there, but then the next morning, the mechanic who worked on the engine overnight came and brought me this little piece that had knocked a little hole in, just about the size of a penny. That's all it took.
So this is what. Go ahead and tell us about what the anti-aircraft guns did. I interrupted you there. You had to fly through.
Yeah, they had two different kinds of shooting that they did. A major target would have 1,000 or more, like Plois, the oil fields, had a couple thousand. And Berlin would have had a couple thousand of these things tracked all over the outskirts, so that no matter which direction you came in from, thousands of them all could be shooting at you. Mm-hmm. So they would start out, and they knew the targets we were coming to before we got there. There was no secret on that. They would set up a barrage flak first, where some guns were assigned to shoot up and put up a wall of constantly exploding shells at the altitude that they knew that we flew, and we flew pretty steadily at the same altitude. The B-24s flew from 20 to 24,000 feet, and the B-17s were better at 25 to 28,000 feet. So those are the levels we came. So when they knew that the B-24s were coming along, they would know that they had about a 3,000-foot range, 20 to 24, to settle in there and throw their wall of flak up. So the barrage flak threw up this wall that you had to fly through to get to the target. Then there were other guns whose mission was assigned to call tracking flak. Each one was radar controlled, and they would pick out the plane of the formation generally that they wanted to shoot, and they had an azimuth of this and the zenith of this that they could literally keep firing at you. As soon as you were here, they could keep firing, and at 5,000 feet, 5 miles up in the air where we were, they had a couple of minutes literally when they could keep us in their guns. So there were a bunch of those that were firing directly at aiming, and in conjunction on a major target, in conjunction with the barrage flak that you flew through and the tracking flak, you got a lot of flak.
Mm-hmm. And your job was to just pilot on through all this stuff?
No turns at all, absolutely not. The lead ship in the formation was to take a track, and it was prescribed where he would go to the initial point, the IP. And this was supposedly to give you both a better angle to come in according to the wind and the visibility and everything to the target you were going to get at, and to confuse the enemy supposedly so that they didn't know which of the major targets you might be turning on. Anyway, from the initial point on, nobody ever deviated. And that was about a 20-mile thing, 10 minutes maybe, that when once you turned on that initial point, you knew that you were never going to turn. You're going to stay in solid formation until you got your bombs off over the target. So we knew that, and the Germans knew that. And so it was just an old-fashioned gridiron warfare, I guess. Remember, long before we were born, the football playing game was the 11 guys would line up and they would run at each other sort of and batter each other.
Right.
Without any tactics, any skill, just pure manpower. That's what this was once you turn from the initial point to the target.
I'm curious, how much of this did it take to shoot a plane down? Because if you're flying through these walls of flak, it seems like that your plane would be seriously damaged a lot.
A lot were, but of course this was aluminum, and there was a lot of space where there was nothing really vital. And that stuff would go through the aluminum and just make holes in it like a tin can with shooting with a shotgun. But there were plenty of vital things. If they got the right hunk of stuff in the engine, an engine was out. If they got it in the gas tank, the gas would burn and you're done. The wing would balloon, you're done. Mm-hmm. They got it in the bomb bay, you hit it and your bombs would go off and you were done. If they got it in the tail and shot the control cables, and the thing was just a mass of cables running because there wasn't electronic control like it is now. If they could sever any of the cables, you could lose directional stability. I've seen planes come back with the whole top half of both of these shot off, but they were able to maintain airborne. They maintained power. And,
I think you said that the skin of the plane was real thin.
Just thin aluminum, yeah.
Yeah, and it's fairly hollow inside, right?
Oh yes, had to be minimize the weight, because the purpose was to get bombs on a target. So they made the plane as light as they could to get the job done, so you could carry more gas to fly farther, more bombs for destruction.
About how many, I guess you would measure in tons, how many tons of bombs did you carry in a
The
mission?
standard carry was 12 500-pounders, or 6,000 pounds.
6,000 pounds.
And as a way that the technology has improved, these were heavy bombers. At the time, they could carry the heaviest load, 6,000 pounds. Right now, the single fighter plane, fighter bomber, maybe can carry, I don't know, 12, 15,000 pounds of bombs, just one of them. So that's technology. Of course, they have guided rockets that they can carry with more
Smart
precision.
bombs they talk about.
Mine was strictly ballistic. The bombardier's bomb sight was set, and his training was so that he could program in the altitude that he was at, the barometric pressure, the direction of the wind, the speed of the airplane, the track of the airplane. And so he would do all of his adjustments so that he could get set to where he could release the bombs at exactly the right moment. All of this had to be programmed in. And that's why once you turned on from the initial point onto the target, you couldn't be maneuvering around to try to avoid flak or anything, because the bombardiers had to have a steady track to set their bomb sights to get the bombs off.
Well, let's talk about some of your personal experiences in the war, because I always find that really interesting. You were in the European theater.
Yeah.
And I think you told me that you were flying your missions out of Italy.
Yes. We were based way down southern Italy, a little town called Manduria, which no reason for you to ever have heard of.
And where were some of the places where you flew your bombing missions?
We had a capability to fly an arc from Marseille and Toulon in southern France up through Switzerland, Germany, Austria, Hungary, Romania, and even down to Turkey, but they were on our side, so we didn't bomb them. And I flew everything. At one time or another, I flew every one of those directions.
Well, I think you were telling me beforehand that you flew several missions over the oil fields in Romania.
Yeah, the historians know of the Ploesti oil fields because they were so vitally important in the war. 1/3 of Hitler's oil came from the Ploesti oil fields in Romania. And they was about 20, 30 miles north of Bucharest, Romania. And being oil fields, why, there was maybe a radius of 30 miles, which all the oil pumping was done, and the cracking stations, the storage stations, and tremendous railroad yards, because in order to get the oil to where Hitler needed it, they had to get it by rail or barge on the Danube. So the railroad yards were real important, and some days we would go to Ploesti just to bomb the railroad yards. I mean, intelligence would get word that there were a bunch of tank cars, hundreds of them, in the rail yards. So the strategy was to send some fast planes in to try to bomb the choke points, because the hundreds of yards of railroad tracks were there, but generally there was only one narrow route for maybe 8 or 10 to come in at either end. So they would try to get planes in early and bomb the choke points so that they couldn't get the tank cars out of there. Then that gave us all day to beat them up if we could get there. So some of the missions were to bomb the oil installations themselves, some the marshalling yards for the railroad.
So I assume these were fairly effective missions, that you all did pretty much damage.
Well, it took 17 missions starting. First famous mission was a low level out of North Africa, which took place in '43. I wasn't there then. And that was a debacle, because the planes got lost and they bombed at low altitude. Some of them dropped their bombs and the other ships behind them ran through their own exploding bomb. I think they put up, maybe out of a couple hundred ships that they put up, they lost about 70. So at that rate, you fly 3 missions, there is no more Air Force. So they decided they wouldn't do that. That was in August of '43. I got to Italy right after the ground troops took enough land to get the air bases there. I got there in February of '44. And our first mission, high-level mission, Ploesti wasn't bombed until April 5th, and that was our first high-level mission. And I was on the first 5 of the first 6. My 50th mission, on my 23rd birthday, I flew to Ploesti. I had a very interesting time. But it took, and since that was my last mission, I came home, and they flew enough more so that a total of 17, They finally had destroyed everything there that was of any use. But it was almost academic because the Russians were so close that a couple of weeks after the last mission that we flew, the Russians came in and took over the oil field anyway. Anyway, we did our job. We cut the oil off through most of the thing. One of the reasons that a lot of Hitler's stuff didn't get to the beachhead on D-Day is because he didn't have the oil to get them there.
Well, I'm fascinated that you were 23 and you were already
My
flying.
23rd birthday on my 50th mission. Actually, my 51st mission, as I think I described to you earlier, the mission is conceived of as going over and dropping a bomb. But because the original 8th Air Force out of England had such a terrible time, such tremendous losses with no target to give them hope to live, the morale was dragging. So they said, well, you guys only have to fly 25 missions. You fly 25. If you can live through 25, you get to go home for a month or more. So they had something to live for, but they had real tough targets that they flew every day. So when we in the 15th Air Force moved into southern Italy, our original targets were in Italy itself, and while the Germans were still controlled it, they didn't have their full fighter force and their good flak guns down there, and they were tended to be easier missions. Our casualties were less. So they said, well, you fellas have to fly 50 missions because they're easy. Then in a couple of months it got so that we were hitting the same targets as the 8th Air Force up in Germany. And so they said, well, that's not fair. So they said, okay, beyond a certain latitude and beyond a certain longitude, there will be major targets, like Ploesti was a double mission credit. So while we had to fly 50 missions, some of them were double credit. I actually threw 33 sorties, as it's called, over the target to bomb. But 17 of them were double credit missions, so I'm saying I flew 50 missions, but the concept really was of the 33 times because so many were double credit.
Well, now I'm curious. You said you got to Italy in 44.
Yeah, in February 44.
Where were you from 42 and 43?
In the training, I went through cadet training. Got my wing, lieutenant bars and wings. Then I went into B-25s, which is the Billy Mitchell bomber that bombed Tokyo, if you remember, a little 2-engine light bomber. And I was in that for 3 or 4 months. All the time I had said before I graduated from cadet school, they asked you, what do you want to fly? Practically everybody wanted to be a fighter pilot, but a few of us knuckleheads just wanted to fly 4-engine bombers for some reason. I thought it'd be swell to have 10 other guys up there, 9 other guys with me.
Even though this was a slower plane.
Oh, yeah. Completely different. The fighter pilot, that was the glamour job.
Right.
This was the truck driver's grubby job.
I mean, this seems like the kind of job that makes you a sitting duck up there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the fighters, they could fight or they could run away, whatever they chose. We had no choice. We had a target. We flew to that target no matter what, as long as the plane would fly.
So you started flying these in...
No, then I went to B-17s, which were 4-engine bombers, and an opening came through, and my request from cadet days, I guess, was honored, or my number just came up, however they worked it. Then I went to fly B-17s in Lockburn, Ohio, and I was there, checked out in them for about 3 months. I flew them, qualified, and they said, now we're going to send you to Clovis, New Mexico, where you will pick up your crew. So we went to Clovis, New Mexico, went on the train, and got off, and they didn't have any B-70s. All they had was B-24s. So I went through the whole B-24 training again, eventually got my crew, and we ended up flying to Arizona, Mexico, final phase in Charleston, South Carolina. Went to New York when the training was done in February 44. Got a brand new airplane in New York and flew it down through South America, Africa, and up into Italy. That's the route that we flew then.
Were you beginning to think you were never going to get in combat?
Yeah, it did seem a little strange. A lot of guys who graduated from cadet school months after I did got there sooner because they went immediately to a group that had the right airplane. And
were you anxious to get in combat, or were you?
Yes, that's what it was all about, really. We were young, and we were trained, and as I look back at it now, we were in our late teens or 20s, and that was the spirit. It was the thing to do. I would have been heartbroken if I could not have been a bomber pilot. So I thank God that I got it. But the training cycle was sort of strange. They would put you where they needed you when they needed you. Finally, I was lucky. I got the 4-engine that I wanted, and I got my crew, and we ended up in Italy.
Did you fly bombing runs over Germany? Because I know in the last years of the war we were bombing Germany.
Oh yes, this is when they got us into the double mission credit thing, because while we were just flying in the little targets in Yugoslavia and Italy, they weren't too dangerous. Then they started sending us to Munich and Vienna and places like that, which is what the 8th Air Force was only having to fly 25 missions to get. So they said, okay, for fairness, when you hit the same targets that the English do, or that the 8th Air Force out of England does, then you will get a double credit. So that in flying 50 missions, I actually flew the 33 sorties, but 17 of them were double credit because they were targets in Germany or the Ploesti oil fields. The Ploesti oil fields were tougher than any target in Germany I ever had.
Is that right?
They were mightily defended. You can imagine, with Hitler needing
I know how
the
bad
oil,
he needed oil.
they put a maximum defense on the oil field.
Did you fly over? Do I remember that you flew over Cologne? Were you in that?
No, that was out of our range.
That was out of your range.
We could get just above Munich and just a little above Vienna, Austria, and any cities in between. But I'm told that after I left and the war was practically over, they actually flew a mission to Berlin, but there was no purpose because Berlin was out of it anyway. That was just some general wanted to get a ribbon, I guess.
When I visited Munich a few years ago, I found it interesting that there were so many new things there, and they kept saying, well, such and such used to be here, but it was destroyed in the bombing.
It was really a devastation. We traveled in Europe, Gene and I did, in the 60s we started going back and traveling in Europe and went through some of the cities that we had bombed, and some of them were just fields of rubble. Some of them they'd started to rebuild. Munich did a pretty good job rebuilding.
Did you ever talk to people in Germany or strike up conversations with German civilians, and it come up that you flew some of the bombing runs?
Yes, they were quite tolerant. We liked the Germans. Was one interesting thing. We were in Vienna, and we hired a day out on a tour bus to go around with a little guy directing, telling you all the sights and everything. And he was about my age, and we came by what were the railroad yards, and he said, and this is where the terrible thing happens. The Americans, they bombed these yards, and the civilian slave laborers that the Germans had dragged in were all housed in little houses right by the railroad yards where they did the work. And so when we bombed the railroad yard, sure, we sprayed bombs all over everything, killed a lot of the slave laborers, as well as the German population. You couldn't help it.
Did you speak up at that time? And
I think Gene looked at me, yeah, but just keep your mouth shut. So I just smiled.
well, I would guess that would be a pretty sensitive situation
Sure.
to be in.
It would have been for him.
Yeah.
Although the several times that I've been able to talk to people who have been in the German combat element, mostly infantry, and a few people in the air, were very cordial. It was, you did your thing, we did ours, and I'm glad we won.
So you have in years since the war maybe come up and talked to people who were in combat, German soldiers, that you think we may have been up against each other? Has that ever happened to you?
I have never met a German fighter pilot, which I would like to do. Time's sort of running out, I guess. I still have hopes. And hope that we could establish that one day we were in the same day and we shot at each other. But that probably won't happen. But I've always wanted to do that.
Any real memorable experience that you would want to share? Maybe a mission that really stands out for you, or one that really has a place in your memory?
Well, my last one, 23rd birthday present, 50th. I had 49 missions. I only needed one, a milk run. But when I went to the briefing in the morning, there the arrow was to Ploesti on the big map.
You thought, oh, no.
A double credit. Oh, I had 4 of these. Not that, but you didn't have a choice. So I said, okay. So we took off for Ploesti, and I drew an airplane in the lot. You didn't always get to fly your own airplane. It got so that it was so difficult to know how the mechanics were going to be able to repair the battle damage overnight as to which planes were going to fly in the morning, that you weren't always assigned your own airplane. So I was assigned an airplane that I had flown before, and it flew all right until you got to about 15, 20,000 feet, and the left wheel kept dropping out of the wing. Now the wheels here will fold up into the wing to cut down air drag. And they were all right until we got to about 15 to 20,000 feet. Then this wheel lost its latching, apparently, and it kept falling down. When that happened, you had an awful lot of drag. You had to put more power on to offset the air resistance to stay in the formation. And I knew we were going to run low on gas, but I knew also we were going over the target because that's what we were there for. So we got into the target area in Ploesti, and we were in the most ferocious air battle I've ever been in the whole time. There were fighters galore there, and we were leading the Air Force at the time, the first group in. And bright sunshiny day, and I could see out in the distance the sun sparkling on the wings and on the propeller spinners of the fighter aircraft, Germans out there marshalling. And I saw them marshal, and they got in a line of about 10 or 12 abreast. And remember the Gregory Peck movie, 12 o'clock high? Mm-hmm. Well, they came in practically 12 o'clock level, almost collision. And they came in 12 abreast on us. Here we are, about a flight being 18 ships all bunched together. And you could see their guns shooting before we could shoot, because they had 20 millimeter cannons, which outranged us by about a quarter of a mile. And they also had rockets, which they were lobbing into us. So they were coming full wing to wing abreast to us in, and I saw their wings sparkle, the gun shooting, and the 20 millimeter cannons were small little cannon shots, but they exploded like a little firecracker, and they threw little slivers of metal all over, and they could cut you up. You could hear it rattle off of it. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like this stuff that was heavy that would wham through. If it hit you directly, it would go through your body or a vital piece of equipment. But I saw these 20 millimeters sparkling around us, that they had time. Time is difficult when exciting things are happening, I guess. So it seemed like a lot longer. It couldn't have been more than 5 or 10 seconds of closure while we were firing and they were firing, but they could fire about 5 seconds before we, because they had a better range. Our gunners, the only two gunners that could get them from where they were coming, were the top turret and the nose turret gunners. They wouldn't do any good to fire because their bullets would have dropped away before the Germans got in. Once they got into range, we got into guns, we got some of them. But they got some of us before we got them. So they swept through, and this is when, on the first sweep through, my tail gunner called, "Tail the pilot, I'm hit, send somebody back to help me." Well, everybody's on intercom in the airplane, and everybody could hear it. And I said, my name was Lemke. He said, "Lemke, we can't send anybody back. Everybody's got a gun." And co-pilot and I are flying the airplane. And the bombardiers, we haven't dropped the bombs yet. The navigator, he was hiding someplace, I guess, I don't know, under the radio shack, radio equipment. Anyway, we had about 10 minutes to go after this till we turned on the IP, the initial point, to the bomb drop. And they swarmed us. Wave after wave would come in that way. When they would come in, then they would separate and they would come top, bottom. They had strategy, just like basketball teams have. Mm-hmm. How many people are going to do what, when, and how. So we had this, they were swarming over us, and they were the Goring yellow-nose fighters. Now this was the elite of the German Air Force. And they were the only ones who were allowed to paint the spinner on the nose in front of the propeller yellow, gold. The other Germans, they could paint whatever their squadron wanted to, but nobody but the Goring's select fighters got the yellow nose.
So you knew you were fighting the big guys.
So I knew that they were so good and so dedicated, they flew their own flak. Now most of the German fighters, when we went into the barrage or the tracking flak got us, they would fly off to the side and wait and pick on the cripples that came out the bottom and get us on the other side. But the Goring yellow-nose fighters flew all the way right through their own flag on us. So they were pros. So my tail gunner's back there hollering, "Come and help me, I'm bleeding to death." I said, "We got a long way to go before you could get any help. Well, finally we got over the target, got the bombs off, and the fighters let up a little. We were still in the flak, but the fighters let up a little so that the bombardier got his bombs off. He went back, and a tail gunner left his gun and went back and hauled the guy to the tail turret. And he was pretty badly hit. I think the frontal attack, something had gone the length of the plane, hit him in the back. So when they got him out and laid him on the table, he was writhing around. And you have about 10 layers of flying clothes. That's an exaggeration, maybe 5 or 6. Your underwear, your pants, your shirt, a coat, a flying suit. In addition to that, then you have a metal flak jacket that you put on. So by the time they got all of that stripped off, and they pulled up his coat, found a hole in his belly, and they were trying to patch it. They stuffed a towel or something in it, and give him some morphine to get him out of pain. He kept lifting up his leg like this. The bombardier and I still laugh about this. Really not so funny. And the bombardier said, "Let me get the damn leg down." And I'm working on you. And he'd go like this. And it wasn't until we got back, and we did get back just barely, got him to the hospital. We went back and visited him at the hospital. We found out that the hunk of flak or whatever it was that went through his back, through his belly. The tail turret guy sits in his tail turret like this. It had gone through out in his back, out his belly, through his leg, or both legs, and out the airplane apparently. So he was feeling more pain from his leg than he was from his gut. But
and you all wouldn't listen to him.
Well, you didn't know because here
Right.
you saw a hole here and a hole back here, yeah, and that was important. That was vital. I mean, you could shoot your leg off and still live, but if you lost too much of your guts, you wouldn't.
And I think you told me that you all still have reunions, so I'm sure that he gives you all a hard time.
The tail gunner never came to a reunion, and he died last year. I was about to look him up 2 years ago, and he had died. I never got contact with him.
And I think you told me at the reunions that when you all replay these missions, I guess like football players replay every play of the game, that you all have a little different story.
Well, sure. Here's the pilots. My war was out here. That's all I could see. The tail gunner's war was here. That's all he could see. The top turret gunner, all he could see was up. The ball turret gunner, all he could see was down. He got the best picture of all of the bomb explosions. I couldn't see the bombs explode, except if there was a group ahead of us that dropped, I could see theirs. But when we dropped ours, by the time ours hit, we were a couple of miles beyond the impact point, so I never saw anything of that.
Well,
anyway, that's a different part of the war that each guy would see. And even the co-pilot and I sitting here together saw almost the same thing, could differ on something that really happened.
And we might finish your story. You all survived the mission,
Well,
and that was your last mission.
yeah, as the story goes, our gas did run out, and in the fighting, I had my hydraulic lines shot out, my oxygen lines were shot out, and the tail gunner was wounded. I don't know how many holes there were any place else, but nobody else was hit, and was running out of fuel. So we got our bombs off, done our duty, and I dropped out of formation so that I could cruise at a more efficient cruising level. In formation, you were always jockeying the throttle, and it was not the most efficient use of gas, and I had to make the most efficient. So I got out and I started a very, very gentle descent alone. And now I'm in the air relatively alone, except for the other stragglers who had been beat up and couldn't hold formation. So the sky was full, you could see them all over. And this is what the German fighters loved. That was sitting duck. They come in and pick them off. A couple of them made a pass at us, but missed. I don't know why. But I came back and came back over what is Yugoslavia. That was Romania. We had to go over Yugoslavia to Romania to get to the field. Came back, and I knew I had to hold about 7,000 or 8,000 feet to get over the mountains of Yugoslavia. And I held that. And we threw out weighted stuff that we didn't really need. And when we got to the Adriatic Ocean, which is about 50 miles wide between Italy, where my base was, and the shore of Yugoslavia, the British were in charge of air-sea rescue, and they had a code that you'd call on the radio to say, identify yourself, and that you were coming down, you were down in the water, or you thought you were coming down. And so when I hit the coastline of Yugoslavia, I had to make a decision. Should we bail out here, take a chance in landing in the water, or take a chance in getting back? Well, the tail gunner could have never survived a parachute. He probably couldn't survive a water landing. But heck, it was our 50th mission. We wanted to go home. We got this far. So I said, if it's all right with you guys, I'm going to try to make Italy. So I left the coast of Yugoslavia at about 7,000 feet and held that altitude pretty much over the 50 miles of water. But as soon as we came up on the Adriatic, I started calling air sea rescue. The code name something like Red Fox, whatever they were at the time. Red Fox, this is Army 792. I gave my position, and we're entering the Adriatic on the coast. Get a radar fix on us, we might come down. All the time there are other planes doing the same thing. All the stragglers were coming back, like I was the cripples, calling air sea rescue, that I'm in the water, pick me up, or we're going down. And Red Fox was answering them and saying, we have a fix on you, we'll have a boat coming in. I would keep calling, and they never answered me. And then I got, you got to think, God, why me? And they never, ever answered. Well, I found out later when I got back that my antenna had been shot off, and I wasn't transmitting. So anyway, I got across the Adriatic and just made landfall on Italy, and I still had about 7,000, 6,000 feet altitude, and my air base was about 20 miles inland, and my engine started going out just as I hit landfall. One went out, one went dead, another was dead. The engineer was back there. Each engine had a gas tank, but they could transfer to other gas tanks. And so he was back there like an organist, twisting these knobs, getting gas to try to flow to keep all four of them going. And one by one they would go out. Finally, about the time I hit the coast of Italy, they were all dead. Nothing. So we spotted an airfield, another airfield in our group, that looked like it was within gliding range. I had the choice. You either go back, go in the water. What I thought I would do would land on the beach. It was rough, but you had a chance of surviving. If you landed in the fields there, you didn't have much of a chance because through the centuries the farmers had dug up the rock and made rock fences, and little plots of ground with everyone with rock fences. So I was going to hit the beach if I had to. If I didn't, I would get the water. But I'm going to try to get this field. And I had enough altitude I could with all four dead engines. I managed to get to this field and made a safe landing. But it was exciting because the field, the regular ships that were not damaged had come down and landed. What was coming in now were the cripples like me. All of them had wounded or dead aboard. When you had a wounded aboard, you would shoot a red Very pistol, which meant that when I land, ambulance meet me. All of us were shooting the red Very pistols, and a bunch of them with engines out and tails dragging, and me with no gasoline. I wasn't going around. So I'm headed for the runway, and the bombardier called up, there's a guy underneath, you're going to land on him. And I said, tough. Because I got no choice. I could go right or left and down, but I couldn't go up. And then I saw another guy coming back was about to land on me. Somehow I slithered in between the two, got down, and ruddered off to the side of the runway to clear the runway for the rest to go by. And that was my 51st mission.
At 23 years old.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm thinking 23 years old.
I look at the 23-year-old kids now, little boys, babies. So we all were. I look at the old pictures that I've got.
And how young you were.
Little boy.
Yeah. Well, I'm afraid our time's about to run out. I've thought ever since I knew that I was going to talk to you how, Tom, have you read Tom Brokaw's book?
No, but I'm going to get it for a Christmas present. I was sure.
Well, the title is The Greatest Generation, and he's been running this series on the news every night, profiling veterans.
I've seen some of those,
and he keeps coming back to the same issue, that this was kind of the generation that put it all on the line.
Yeah.
Does that embarrass you when people heap that kind of praises on you guys that were up there in World War II?
No, it was routine. Everybody was doing what you're supposed to do. It was routine.
So you feel like you just did your duty?
Oh, yeah. I would have been heartbroken if I couldn't have gotten into combat. Well, there were times when I said, God, it's all right if you give me an appendix, and I have to have my appendix out, and I don't have to fly for a couple of weeks. That's all I would need. But he never did.
Well, I think we all owe a big debt of gratitude to your generation, because if you hadn't been up there flying those bombing raids, I doubt if we'd be sitting in this nice, safe United States that we sit in. So I thank you for coming today and sharing your stories with us. And I'm sure if anybody wants to talk to you about your other World War II experiences, you're available.
As many hours as they can spare.
As many hours as you can spare.
I appreciate being allowed to do this. Really, I do.
Well, I enjoyed it. I'm Mary Lou Matthews, and my guest today has been Bill Eldred, who has shared with us some of his experiences for World War II. Thank you for tuning in.
We're done.